war loomed on the horizon. The Zarthan Empire had been the dominant force in the galaxy for centuries, its warriors feared for their brutal strength and direct combat prowess. To the Zarthans, human technology was a joke, primitive, reliant on tricks rather than strength. They had ridiculed human strategy for years, considering them an inferior species, barely worth acknowledging. But that was about to change. In the heart of humanity's fleet, Captain Alex Mercer stood at the command deck, his eyes fixed on the distant stars. A veteran of countless battles, Mercer had seen the devastation the Zarthans could wreak, but he wasn't a man to back down easily. His graying hair and the lines etched into his face told a story of long-fought wars, hard decisions, and the weight of leadership. Now, his fleet carried humanity's newest weapon, one that could tip the balance of power for good, or destroy them all. Beside him, Lieutenant Maya Reyes, the brilliant scientist responsible for the long-range energy weapons, monitored her data feed. Reyes had envisioned this moment for years, but now that it had arrived, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. She had designed the weapons to give humanity a fighting chance, but their power was immense. Too immense, perhaps. "We're ready, Captain," she said, her voice steady despite her inner conflict. "Targets in range." Mercer's gaze didn't shift. "And the Zarthans? Do they suspect?" Reyes shook her head. "They're coming in full force. They don't expect us to fire until they're in range for close combat. They think they've won before the battle even begins." Mercer's lips tightened into a thin line. "Then they're in for a surprise." The Zarthan fleet appeared on the tactical display, massive, heavily armed, and moving straight toward them. Typical Zarthan arrogance. They had never needed to worry about being outmaneuvered or outgunned. Their battleships were built for one thing: to crush their enemies up close, in brutal, overwhelming force. Mercer tapped the comms. "All ships, prepare to fire on my command." There was a pause. In that brief moment, Reyes could sense the weight of history shifting. This would be humanity's first deployment of the long-range energy weapons. The technology she had created, theoretical until now, would be put to the ultimate test. Fire! The energy weapons roared to life, streaking across the void of space, invisible to the naked eye but devastating in their precision. The Zarthans had no chance to react. Their ships began to implode, torn apart before they even knew they were under attack. Their vaunted close combat tactics rendered useless. They were completely unprepared for a battle fought from such a distance. The tactical feed lit up with explosions as ship after ship disintegrated. Reyes watched the data pour in, heart pounding. It was working. The weapons were functioning perfectly, each shot calculated, each target neutralized with cold, clinical efficiency. Mercer's jaw clenched as he observed the destruction. His fleet was untouched, safe behind a wall of distance, but something gnawed at him. The Zarthans were falling too easily. Too fast. There was no fight, no struggle. It was annihilation. "Captain," Reyes said, glancing at him. "We did it." But Mercer didn't answer right away. His eyes were still fixed on the tactical display, watching as the remaining Zarthan ships attempted to flee, only to be picked off one by one. He felt no satisfaction, only a cold, heavy weight in his chest. Victory had come, yes, but at what cost? "Pull back the fleet," Mercer finally ordered. "Let them run." Reyes blinked. "Sir?" Mercer's voice was firm. "We've made our point. There's no need to chase them down." Reluctantly, Reyes nodded, her fingers dancing across the console. The energy weapons powered down, and the fleet returned to standby. For a moment, silence filled the command deck. The Zarthans, those fearsome warriors who had once scoffed at human tactics, had been obliterated. It was a decisive victory, one that would ripple across the galaxy, no doubt. Word would spread. Humanity had a weapon that no one had expected, and no one could stop. And yet, as Mercer stared into the endless black of space, he couldn't shake the unease that settled deep within him. The weapon had performed beyond expectations, but something about the sheer destructive force disturbed him. It was too easy. The enemy had been given no chance to fight back. There was no honor in this kind of war, only cold, calculated devastation. Mercer? Reyes asked, sensing his tension. We won. This was what we wanted. He turned to face her, his expression hard to read. We've changed the game, Maya. The question is, can we live with the rules we've just written? She didn't have an answer. Instead, she looked back to her console, where the remnants of the battle were still displayed. This was what she had fought for, humanity's chance to survive, to thrive in a galaxy that had tried to crush them. And yet, as she watched the wreckage of the Zarthan fleet drift silently through space, she wondered if Mercer was right. Had they won too much? Had they crossed a line they couldn't uncross? In that moment, the victory felt hollow, tinged with a sense of foreboding neither of them could shake. The Zarthan High Command was in chaos. The sudden, humiliating defeat at the hands of humans, an inferior species in their eyes, had sent shockwaves through the Empire. Zarthan warriors, bred and trained for centuries in the art of close combat, had been destroyed before they could even reach their enemy. The human weaponry had decimated their fleet from such an impossible distance that they hadn't had the chance to respond. To them, it was more than a military failure, it was an insult. In the Imperial throne room, the Zarthan Emperor glared down at his generals. His claws gripped the armrests of his throne, his anger radiating throughout the chamber. He was a massive figure, his body adorned with scars from countless battles, each one a testament to his physical prowess. The humans hadn't earned those scars. They hadn't even dared to face their opponents up close. Cowards! He hissed. His voice boomed across the room, filled with disdain. They dared to strike from the shadows, with weapons that require no skill, no honor. The generals, though proud warriors themselves, said nothing. They couldn't. The Emperor's rage was absolute, and any hint of dissent would be met with swift execution. Among them stood General Kale, one of the Empire's most cunning strategists. Unlike his peers, Kale wasn't swayed by the Emperor's obsession with honor in battle. His mind, sharp as a blade, was focused entirely on the future. To him, this was more than just a lost battle, it was a wake-up call. They rely on this long-range weaponry because they know they cannot stand against us face to face. The Emperor continued. But we will make them pay. We will strike back, and this time, we will crush them beneath our feet. Kale stepped forward, his movements calm and deliberate. With respect, Your Majesty, we must first understand their technology. They wield it with precision, but it is not invincible. There are ways to counter such power. The Emperor narrowed his eyes. You think their weapons are more than mere tricks, Kale? I think, Kale replied, that they are desperate. These weapons are their only means of survival. If we learn how they work, we can turn their greatest strength against them. Let them hide in the shadows, we will bring the battle to them. The Emperor's scowl deepened, but he listened. Kale's reputation for success in the most difficult campaigns was hard to ignore. The Emperor's pride demanded an overwhelming retaliation, but even he understood that brute force alone wouldn't work. Not this time. Very well, the Emperor said after a long pause. Take what forces you need. Capture their technology. I want to know how these weapons work, and I want them destroyed. Kale bowed, his face impassive, though a flicker of satisfaction passed through his eyes. It will be done. With the Emperor's blessing, Kale wasted no time. He assembled the Zarthan Elite Task Force, a group of specially trained operatives who excelled in covert operations. They were not bound by the traditional rules of engagement that Zarthan warriors lived by. These soldiers were merciless, adaptable, and had no qualms about fighting dirty if it meant achieving victory. Kale knew that a direct assault on humanity's fleet would only result in more humiliating losses. Instead, his plan was simple: infiltrate, steal, and destroy. At the heart of this task force were elite assassins, hackers, and engineers, each handpicked for their skills. They would slip past human defenses, locate the long-range energy weapon technology, and sabotage it. Kale would ensure that humanity never had the chance to use their cowardly weapons again. As the Zarthan task force prepared for their mission, tension began to rise aboard Captain Mercer's flagship. Word of the humans' victory had spread, but instead of celebration, there was an unease that lingered in the air. Mercer could feel it within himself. The power of the long-range energy weapons was undeniable, but with it came a new sense of responsibility, one that weighed heavily on him. Reyes, on the other hand, was more pragmatic. She believed they had finally leveled the playing field, and humanity's survival depended on their ability to maintain this technological advantage. As she stood with Mercer in the ship's command center, reviewing the latest reports, her optimism clashed with his growing apprehension. "We should be preparing for the next strike," Reyes said, her tone firm. "The Zarthans won't sit back and lick their wounds. They'll come at us harder." "They're not fools," Mercer replied. "They'll adapt. We can't rely on these weapons alone." Reyes shook her head. "It's not about relying on them. It's about using them wisely. We've always been the underdogs, Alex. For once, we have the upper hand." Mercer glanced at her, his expression dark. "But at what cost, Maya? The more we use these weapons, the more we escalate this war. The Zarthans will stop at nothing to get their hands on this technology. That's exactly why we have to stay ahead," Reyes insisted. "We're fighting for survival. If we hesitate now, we'll lose everything." Mercer looked out at the vastness of space, the weight of command pressing down on him. He knew Reyes was right in some ways. Humanity couldn't afford to be passive. But he also couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with fire. These weapons were too powerful, too dangerous. And the Zarthans would stop at nothing to take them. "We need to be prepared for their counterattack," Mercer finally said, his voice grim. "And we need to be ready for what comes after." Reyes crossed her arms, studying him. "You're worried we'll lose control. I'm worried we already have." The tension between them was palpable, each of them standing on opposite sides of an invisible line. Reyes saw the long-range energy weapons as humanity's salvation, a chance to finally secure their place in the galaxy. Mercer, however, saw the darker side, the potential for destruction, for losing their moral compass in the pursuit of survival. As the Zarthan Elite Task Force moved into position, ready to strike at the heart of humanity's technological advantage, both Reyes and Mercer knew that the next battle would be unlike any they had faced before. Inside the human research base, the atmosphere was quiet, almost too quiet. Deep beneath the surface, scientists and engineers moved about their workstations, unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows. Among them were blueprints, prototypes, and the closely guarded designs of the long-range energy weapons that had turned the tide of battle in humanity's favor. But now, those very designs were the target of a far more dangerous threat. General Kale, the leader of the Zarthan Empire's elite task force, moved like a shadow through the facility, his team of infiltrators following closely behind. They had spent weeks preparing for this mission, gathering intel, learning human protocols, and now, they were inside the heart of humanity's military might. Their mission was clear: steal the technology and cripple humanity's only advantage before it could spread further. "We're in position," Kale whispered, his cold eyes scanning the room as his team began hacking into the base's mainframe. Every second counted. The humans wouldn't know they were here until it was too late. Meanwhile, aboard the human command ship, Captain Mercer was deep in thought. He couldn't shake the unease that had been building since their last battle. The long-range energy weapons had saved them twice now, but every time they fired, something inside him recoiled. These weapons weren't just powerful, they were dangerous, unpredictable. And the longer they relied on them, the more they risked losing control of the very thing that had given them an edge. "Alex, you're distracted," Lieutenant Reyes said, snapping him out of his reverie. She was as confident as ever, her eyes still bright with the ambition that had fueled her creation of the weapons. "I'm worried," Mercer replied, turning to face her. "We've been winning, but at what cost? These weapons, they could destabilize everything." "Destabilize?" Reyes scoffed, crossing her arms. "We're finally holding our own against the Zarthans. For once, they're scared of us. We can't afford to back down now." Mercer shook his head, his brow furrowed in frustration. "That's the problem. If we keep using these weapons, what's to stop others from getting their hands on them? What happens when every fleet in the galaxy has the power to wipe out entire armadas from thousands of miles away? There's no going back after that. Reyes exhaled, her patience clearly wearing thin. I understand your concerns, Alex, but we don't have the luxury of moral debates right now. The Zarthans won't hesitate to use anything against us. We either fight with everything we've got, or we lose. Before Mercer could respond, an alarm blared through the ship. His heart skipped a beat as he looked at the control panel, the red flashing lights indicating a security breach at the research facility. Intruders, Reyes muttered, her face turning serious as she rushed to her station. Mercer was already moving, his mind racing. Get me a visual, he barked to the communications officer. Moments later, the screen lit up with a grainy feed from the facility's security cameras. Mercer's blood ran cold. Zarthans, heavily armed and moving with deadly precision, were inside the facility. They're after the weapon designs, Reyes whispered, her face pale. Mercer clenched his jaw. They're not just here to steal the technology. They'll sabotage the entire facility if they can. We have to stop them before they transmit anything back to the Empire. Back inside the research base, General Kale watched as one of his engineers finished bypassing the final firewall. The data was pouring in now, schematics, energy output data, targeting algorithms. All the secrets of the long-range energy weapons were being copied and encrypted for transmission back to the Zarthan fleet. How long until the data is ready for extraction? Kale asked, his voice calm despite the urgency. Less than 5 minutes, General, the engineer replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard. We're almost there. Kale nodded, satisfied. This mission had gone smoother than expected. The humans had no idea they were even here. But that confidence was short-lived. A second alarm blared through the base, and Kale's eyes narrowed. The humans knew now. He turned to his team. Prepare for extraction, he ordered. Destroy anything that remains once we have the data. Above, Mercer and Reyes were racing against the clock. Get a strike team to the base immediately, Mercer ordered, but he knew it would be a close call. We need to shut down the uplink before they finish transmitting. Reyes's hands flew over the controls. I'm locking down the facility's internal systems, but they've already compromised a lot of our firewalls. If we don't stop them in time... I know, Mercer interrupted. He didn't need her to finish the sentence. If the Zarthans got away with the technology, everything humanity had gained could be lost. As they coordinated the response, the tension between Mercer and Reyes grew. Mercer's concern wasn't just about the immediate danger, it was about the bigger picture. If the Zarthans got their hands on this technology, the consequences could be catastrophic. It wasn't just about defending humanity anymore. It was about whether they were willing to unleash this kind of power into the galaxy. They're going to get it, Alex, Reyes said, her voice shaking. If they transmit that data, the Zarthans will reverse engineer it, mass produce it. We'll lose everything. Then we can't let that happen, Mercer replied, his face set with determination. Back inside the facility, Kale's team had nearly completed the data transfer when the first wave of human security forces arrived. A firefight broke out in the narrow corridors, energy blasts ricocheting off the walls as both sides fought desperately. But the Zarthans were prepared. They held their ground, defending the data terminal with everything they had. Mercer watched the chaos unfold on the screen. Send in more troops, he ordered. We have to overwhelm them before they can finish. But time was running out. Kale's team had already transmitted a portion of the data back to their empire, and the final piece of the puzzle was mere seconds away from being sent. Mercer could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. If they didn't act now, everything they had fought for could be undone. We have to shut it down, Reyes said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mercer nodded. Prepare to cut the uplink manually. We'll have to do it from the inside. He knew it was a long shot, but it was their only hope. The clock was ticking, and the fate of humanity's greatest weapon hung in the balance. Mercer moved swiftly through the narrow halls of the research base, adrenaline pumping as he scanned for any sign of General Kale's team. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the corridors, each burst a reminder that time was running out. Beside him, Reyes was focused, her face a mask of determination. Neither of them spoke, but the weight of the moment pressed down on them both. General Kale's task force had nearly completed their mission. The stolen data was already in their possession, and now they just needed to escape. But Mercer wasn't about to let that happen. If the Zarthans succeeded in smuggling out the long-range energy weapon technology, the balance of power would tip, and the entire galaxy would be thrown into chaos. As they reached the central chamber, a flash of movement caught Mercer's eye. Kale's elite soldiers, skilled in stealth and deception, moved like shadows across the room. Mercer raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the room was plunged into darkness. The power had been cut, and suddenly, the Zarthans had the upper hand. Reyes cursed under her breath. "They're playing games." Mercer nodded grimly. "We can't let them escape. If this technology falls into their hands—" "I know," Reyes interrupted. "But we're running out of options." In the pitch-black room, the only sound was their own breathing, mixed with the soft hum of distant machinery. Mercer strained his ears, trying to pinpoint Kale's location. The Zarthans thrived in chaos like this. They were trained to exploit uncertainty, to use confusion to their advantage. A sudden blast of energy lit up the room, and Mercer ducked just in time to avoid being hit. Reyes retaliated, her own weapon firing off a volley of shots into the dark, but it was clear they were being outmaneuvered. "Stay close," Mercer whispered, his voice tense. He knew they had one last shot to stop the Zarthans before they escaped with the stolen data. They just needed to locate Kale and disable the device before the transmission was complete. Mercer's mind raced, his thoughts clouded by doubt. This battle wasn't just about technology anymore. It was about something far bigger. If they continued down this path, relying on weapons so powerful they could obliterate fleets from across the stars, what kind of future were they creating? He glanced at Reyes, who was focused solely on the mission, unaware of the inner conflict tearing at him. They pressed forward, their steps cautious as they moved through the darkened space. Suddenly, a voice rang out, cold and calculated. "Captain Mercer." Kale's voice echoed through the room, taunting. "Do you really think you can stop what's already begun? This technology belongs to the galaxy now." Mercer tightened his grip on his weapon. "This ends here, Kale." Kale laughed, the sound chilling in the darkness. "You humans, so quick to wield power, yet so afraid of its consequences. If you don't embrace it, someone else will." Mercer's jaw clenched. The Zarthan general was right about one thing. They had been quick to adopt these new weapons without fully understanding their impact. And now, standing on the edge of an irreversible arms race, Mercer felt the weight of his decisions more than ever. He could hear movement nearby, the faint sound of Kale's team preparing for their final escape. Mercer exchanged a glance with Reyes, and in that moment, he knew what had to be done. "We need to destroy the technology," he said quietly, his voice firm. Reyes froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. "What? Alex, you can't be serious." "I am," he replied, his tone resolute. "We've already seen the destruction these weapons can cause. If the Zarthans get their hands on this, the galaxy will burn." Reyes shook her head, her expression torn. "But we've worked so hard for this. You saw how it turned the tide of battle. We finally have a chance to win, to defend ourselves. And what happens when every faction out there has this power? When entire systems are wiped out before they even know they're under attack? It'll be the end of everything." Reyes looked away, struggling with the weight of Mercer's words. She had created these weapons to protect humanity, to give them an edge in a war they were losing. But now, faced with the potential consequences, she couldn't deny the truth. This power, unchecked, would destroy not just their enemies, but their future. "Fine," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Do it." Mercer didn't hesitate. He activated the self-destruct sequence on the weapon's core, the device that stored the blueprints and energy configurations. The system hummed to life, and a countdown began, 5 minutes until the entire facility would be obliterated. Kale's voice cut through the silence again, this time filled with anger. You fool! You're going to destroy the very thing that could save your people! Mercer didn't reply. He and Reyes moved quickly, heading toward the exit as the base's alarms blared around them. They had done what they came to do. The technology would be lost, but so would the Zarthan's chance to steal it. As they reached the surface, the first explosions rocked the facility behind them. The ground shook, and a plume of smoke rose into the sky. It was over. The technology that had given them the upper hand, and nearly doomed them, was gone. Reyes stood beside Mercer, her face a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Do you think we did the right thing? She asked quietly. Mercer looked at the burning wreckage in the distance, his expression unreadable. I don't know, he admitted. But I know that if we had let it continue, we would have become just like them, willing to destroy anything that stood in our way. Reyes nodded slowly, the weight of their decision settling over them. So what now? Mercer looked up at the sky, where the remnants of the Zarthan fleet were retreating into the stars. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. And now, without the long-range weapons, they would have to rely on something far more dangerous than technology: human ingenuity. We move forward, Mercer said, his voice steady. And we remember that power isn't just about what we create. It's about how we choose to use it, or not. The Zarthan Empire had been defeated once again, but the galaxy would always be filled with threats, both known and unknown. For now, humanity had proven its strength not just through its weapons, but through its ability to make the hard choice, the choice to let go of power when it threatened to consume them. As the smoke cleared and the last echoes of battle faded, Mercer and Reyes stood as symbols of that strength, knowing that the real battle had just begun.